And welcome once again to the Buffalo History Channel. This is Doug Ruffin here. I want to thank you all for your continued support of the Buffalo History Channel. We are still in the midst of our summer season. We've got to thank you for supporting the content, watching the content. I'm hearing from people saying that they've been binge watching the content. I got to give a shout out to Dr. Sylvia Lloyd that put together these little promotional videos, and one of it had Netflix in there, and I was very honored by that. I'm like, oh, watch Netflix? Nah, Buffalo History Channel. I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, I certainly appreciate that. Shout out to Sylvia, Dr. Lloyd, as I call her. Today, this is an interview that I am very, very excited and happy about. I've been wanting to get this brother on for a minute. This is a gentleman that I met back in, I want to say 1999. The first time I saw this brother perform, it was at a Langston Hughes event. You might remember it, Lady Day in Langston.
Wow. Okay.
Did some poetry at the event. I think a few months later, there was another event held by Solar Ingram and Doc Martin called Hip Hop Culture versus the Civil Rights Movement.
I remember that.
And he got up and you stood up and talked, and then we met. Then we formally met at the Pine Grove reunion later, 1 month later.
Yes.
And we've been good friends ever since. I've seen this brother do his performances throughout the late 90s and 2000s, and he's been one of the. He himself is a legend of the Buffalo art community in his own right. Neither of us are living in the city of Buffalo anymore, but as the saying goes, we're hardly home, but we are always repping.
Yes.
Now we've been doing a lot of coverage of the Buffalo arts community, and it started off with Sonship Communications. From there, went to the Black Dance Workshop, and then everything just took off from there. And I knew I had to get this brother on to talk about, we're going to talk about the arts and certainly his work. Absolutely, we'll be talking about Njozi. And,
Okay.
we're going to talk about a lot, but I first want to welcome this brother, Dr. I want to introduce him properly. Dr. Ntare Ali Gault, PhD. Welcome to the Buffalo History Channel, my brother.
Thank you, Doug. And all those other organizations you mentioned, I was influenced and touched by all of those. I mean, in a very real way, not just metaphorically. I was touched by all of them. And you even mentioned Dr. Lloyd. Her grandmother and my mother were best of friends.
Okay.
And Mrs. Burgos.
Yes.
It's hard to talk about Irene Gault without talking about Elizabeth Burgos, to the point where they even transitioned 10 days apart from each other.
Wow.
And I lived across the street from the Burgos, so I remember Dr. Lloyd when she was born.
Oh, really?
Literally. Yeah.
And she's watching this. I'm sure she's cracking
okay. Well, she know I'm telling the truth. I grew up with her uncles.
Okay.
Yeah, and like her mom. I mean, I'm not going to go too far off in it, but her mom used to take me to get Halloween candy. Take us trick or treating. So we got history.
Speaking of history, let's start there first with your mother, Irene Gault. A lot of your work, I've noticed, has been tied into your family. So why don't you talk to us about your family, your mother, and growing. You grew up in the Fruit Belt.
Yes,
my parents. That too.
My parents. What's funny is like my family, the Fruit Belt. They're every bit a part of everything I've done, literally. But my mother and father first moved to the Fruit Belt in they got married in July of 1960, and they moved into the Fruit Belt. And my father still lives there.
Mm.
And so my mother, what was wild about my mother is that she had not completed high school. She didn't complete high school until I was a child. And, but she saw so many things going wrong. And so she was taking upon herself to start immersing herself in the community. She had moved from the Prairie Projects and she had been widowed. Her first husband had been killed a few years before. And so she had this hard life already. By the time she was 29, she had lived several lifetimes.
Right.
You know, she was widowed at 25. She had two small children. She had been a teen mother. She had two small children. She was living in Lackawanna, moved to Perry Projects, met my father, moved to the Fruit Belt. And then she saw the neighborhood transition. You know, all of a sudden, like, like the Mad Dogs were there, and so she started working with the gangs. And now what's funny, like looking back on it, she wasn't much older than them. You know? but it's just the way our community was, that when you call someone Mr. and Mrs., you immediately treated them with respect. Absolutely. And didn't think about their ages, and didn't think about the fact that she was only probably about 15 years older than them. But yeah, so she and my father started working within the community, and especially because I had two brothers who were growing up there, and trying to avoid them getting into stuff. So my father they would have like a street football team, and my father would be be coaching the street football team or the street baseball team. I think they called themselves the Rose Street Hawks. And they started befriending a lot of people. And this time, they became close friends with my oldest brother was close friends with former council president James Pitts. The first person my father ever met when he moved to Buffalo was George K. Arthur. My father moved from South Carolina. He moved on to Clinton Street and met George K. Arthur at a park. Like he said, he went outside and they became fast friends and stayed friends until, so that's a lot of my beginnings, was just growing up and seeing them working with the Fruit Belt as it was transitioning from a traditional, from a white German neighborhood into a Black neighborhood.
Okay. So I know your mother was involved in doing something with, I'm not sure the details of it but I know it involved the highway, the 33 expressway.
Yeah. Well, what happened was my mother was she created the Federation of Black Clubs. And she was the president, and she was the president of the Rose Street Block Club. And the Federation of Block Clubs was the entire Fruit Belt. And so whenever anything happened, people would call on her. And so at the time when the 33 was built, they only made one overpass at Peach Street. And so if you wanted to go over to Genesee, like from somewhere in the Fruit Belt, you had to like walk over the Peach Street Bridge, walk over the Jefferson Avenue Bridge. But other than that, you had to walk all the way down to Michigan Street. So what a lot of people started to do was they would do a dash across the expressway. And so people were getting hit and killed. And one of her friends had a son that got killed. Mrs. Williams, she had a son that got killed while trying to run across the expressway. And she came and talked to my mother. And my mother asked, like what everybody else would ask, like, why didn't he go to the Peach Street overpass? And she's like, well, Mrs. Williams explained, well, that was, that's, half a mile away. That means you got to walk a half mile down, cross the bridge, and walk another half mile to get to where you're trying to go. And so then my mother started asking the city and the state, well, can a bridge be built? And they said no. They just gave her a flat no. And so she said, well, she started asking some more, and she just kept on getting flat no's. And so then she said, okay, I have another solution. My mother was known for protests. I mean, to start getting parks built in the city. She literally took the kids down to City Hall and started having them play football in City Hall. And all of a sudden they came up with money to build some recreational parks.
Right.
To get these kids out of
the arm a little bit.
Yeah. And so she threatened a boycott of the 33. And it was embarrassing because I was going to School 68 at the time, which is over there in Westminster and Bailey. And it's now called Westminster Community Charter School.
Right.
But it was virtually all white at the time. And so my mother was going on the news. All the news stations would be at the house talking to my mother and having press conferences. Are you really going to boycott? And my mother would be getting on the news saying, we're going to boycott, and we're going to boycott when white folks are trying to get to work. Now I got to go back to school with all these white folks. So,
you didn't hide in the bedroom?
The teachers would be asking me, because I was in the 6th grade, the teachers would be asking me, like, this woman, Irene Gault, do you know her? Yeah, I know her. How do you know her? She related to you?
Well,
yeah, we're related.
How are you hiding so much?
How are you related? She's my mother. So she threatened to boycott, and then she finally gave a date and a time that it was going to be a boycott of the 33. And it was on all the stations that if a deal was not made, and they were giving like alternate routes for people to drive, because there was Mrs. Gault is threatening this big boycott of the 33 during rush hour. And so they're giving alternate routes, like how to get to work and things like that. And so then that night they had a meeting at St. John's, and they struck a deal, and they identified $1 million from the city, the county, and the state to build this bridge. And they had to buy some property, take down some houses so they could build the approach to the bridge, and was one of the first handicap bridges ever made. Because they said the other one was all steps. Now she demanded one that was handicapped, and they identified the money, and they said they had to identify it by 11 o'clock. So for the news, and so they identified it, and so then 11 o'clock they came on and said the boycott is off. The bridge will be built. And so it's funny, I have a heritage room. I actually have a picture when they were dedicating when they were cutting the ribbon, and she's with Arthur Eve and different ones, and they're cutting the ribbon when the bridge actually got built, and it still stands. Mm-hmm. And what's funny is that when I formed my groups, I know we're going to get into that later, when I formed the Njozi Poets, that was kind of the initiation. We would have to go down to that bridge, and we have to run up and across the bridge and stuff like that while doing our poetry, and me giving them the history of that bridge, because I'm like, okay, see, this was built through sacrifice. It was lives. So your poetry is more than you. Right. Your poetry is more than just you get up there and you spitting some words that you strung together. Mm-hmm. It got to be life, and that for me, that bridge signifies that.
Okay, so I know, and I guess we can segue into your work now, because a lot of much of that did tie in to your work and into your art. So now I'm not sure if, I know your history was initially with the Langston Hughes Institute. I'm not sure if it really began there or not, but talk to us about how that got you in, how your mother's work and protesting got you into your art.
Well, that was also a direct link. My mother was on the board for the Langston Hughes Institute. And so my sister was already it was a group there called, a performing group called Spectra. And Spectra was going all over the place performing. And I was an extreme introvert. I mean, like to an extreme case. But when I would see Spectra performing, I would love seeing them perform. And we had, like a hit parade in Spectra. Sean McQuiller, the lead singer of Kool and the Gang, his aunt was Oralee Delgado. And like you were interviewing Ed Lawrence before. Jill Lawrence was in Spectra. Keisha West, probably the baddest track athlete to come out of Buffalo. One of your Bennett High alums. She was in there. Roger Garr, like he became a popular actor, had like a recurring role on Living Single. Micah Jackson, she's Lucille Clifton's niece. She was in there, and so it was just this talent in there that was amazing. And here I was like 12 years old, and I wanted to do something. Like, I didn't know what, but I wanted to do something. And so right after my 12th birthday, I walked down to the Langston Hughes Center with two of my friends, with Clifton Jackson and Andrew Burgos, and we walked down there and said, we want to join. And I think that was July 9th, 1979. And we joined. And so my first performances were with them. And that's what started, I started to learn African dance, modern jazz. And so three people I have to mention. I already mentioned Oralee Delgado, Anthony Delgado, and Vernice Turner. Vernice is still heavily in my life, and still consult with her and things like that. But she was my dance teacher. And so I started learning dance and techniques, and then started learning drama. And so that's what modeling, which I did like when I was much younger. I did some modeling and did some commercials, but that's where it began. It was birthed at the Langston Hughes Institute. My mother was even shocked. My mother and father didn't know I was joining Spectra. So when I came back home and said, yeah, Andrew, Clifton, and we joined Spectra. She was like, what? I didn't even know you were interested. Yeah, so, go figure. But yeah, so that was where it began.
Okay, and that was mainly through the 80s. You were involved
very early, the late 70s, like 79. I joined, early 80s, and then I drifted away. When I got into high school, I originally went to Burgard, and I started getting into all kinds of trouble at Burgard. I mean, if I didn't leave Burgard, I would end up in Attica. I used to walk into school, sign in so that nobody will call my house and say that he missed school. I would go sign in. I'll be at Central Park Plaza. I'll be at Bennett. I'll be at Lafayette. I'll be at every other high school in the city.
Hey, we all had to cut up at some point during them days.
Yeah. The only thing that chilled that out was one time I was skipping school, and I went down to the Main Place Mall. Dumb place to go skipping school. And I'm walking down there acting ignorant with my friends, and we're doing like petty robberies and stuff, like petty crimes and stuff. I ended up walking right behind my mother.
Oh boy. Where's she going?
She's on lunch break. I didn't have an idea where she took her lunch breaks. I'm walking and I look up and I see my mother. I'm like, oh, and I'm like trying to quiet my friends down, because that's not the cool thing to say, is, which we all would have gotten into trouble, but that's not the cool thing to say. It's like, my mommy's right there. So I'm like, can we like go somewhere else?
I mean, our parents, something about our parents back in those days, they just had that savoir-faire type of, savoir-faire, we everywhere type. You never know where
exactly.
They're not there, somebody around, somebody they know is watching you.
And then another time I was skipping and I got on the bus and my sister went to Hutch Tech. I get on the bus with my sister. Now I go to Burgard. There's no way I should be getting on the bus with anybody coming from Hutch Tech. And my sister's like, what are you doing? You're not even supposed to be out of school yet. You know? So I was like, okay, my life of crime got it. You know? I'm getting busted by the
It's time to hang it up, Ntare.
Yeah, give it up. Now, mind you, my mother knew I was into something. She just didn't know what. And so she was working for the Division for Youth at the time, the New York State Division for Youth. And she gathered up a whole bunch of kids and took us to Attica for a Scared Straight like program.
Yeah.
And took me. And scared me straight. And then out of nowhere, they used me for an example. I can't use all the language that they use in the example.
Well, we can imagine.
But they traded me for a pack of cigarettes. And they wanted to show how it would be if I got in there.
Yeah.
And so they were like, hey, give me some cigarettes. And so they threw a guy a pack of cigarettes, pushed me across the room and said, now you belong to him. I turned to everybody in the program and said, I ain't never coming back. So, the only other time I went back to Attica is when I took my my oldest stepson because, you know, he was getting to that cool thing and all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, okay, well, let me show you. And I took him on a tour. My sister was working at Attica by this time. And so I took him on a tour of Attica. He didn't get the same thing that I got, but he didn't like those bars clinking behind him.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we went down to the holding center when we were like in kindergarten, or I don't think kindergarten. I think we were first grade or something, first or second grade, and they had a little thing where they put us in the cells and showed us what it's like. We're little kids, and they closing the. I walked in there. I ran out of there. I don't go in there.
Well, the amazing thing was, it was like about 20 of us, and 15 ended up going back into the system.
Yeah.
Including one of my nephews.
Right.
So, you know, the lesson did not get learned by everybody. I mean, they had different things going on in their lives. Right. So I saw that reality, that so many of them went back into the system. So, I mean, I wasn't in the system yet. My mother's doing it as a preventive thing for me, you know, just in case you want to go into the system.
Yeah. Now, before I transition over to the poetry part, I know it's around the late 80s, you were in this other production called, yes, you too could be a city rhythm dancer. And okay. I never would have knew unless you pointed yourself out.
That's one of the things I did not prepare for this interview. Okay. Doug, you know, there's some payback in your future.
I know it is.
There's some payback in your future. But yeah, actually, City Rhythm was a fun thing. You know, when, you know, for people who don't know, it was Buffalo had started its own dance show.
Right.
And so I knew a lot of the people were there because I was hanging out with them at the clubs.
Yeah.
And so I started going down there and started having a ball. And I think it was like on a Tuesday night we were recording.
Oh, Tuesday night you recorded?
Yeah, because actually there was a show before that I used to go on called Clubhouse 9, Rude Girl Productions, Leela Polite. And so, but that was mostly house music. And so I used to go to Clubhouse 9 all the time. And we were usually, she was usually recording at the Jam Club. And back then I was in college and I was a DJ in college. And so when they when Clubhouse 9 ended, Leela Polite actually started working for oh boy, I don't know why his name is escaping me, but he's now the president of Premier Boxing. He became Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s advisor.
You're not talking about Alan Heyman, are you?
Alan Heyman.
Alan Heyman, okay.
Yeah, Leela Polite started working for Al Heyman because he started doing more concert promotions.
Okay.
And so then many of us who were with Clubhouse 9, we went over to City Rhythm. So,
okay. I don't even know that I was even old enough to be on City Rhythms.
Nah, you weren't.
Yeah, I knew about it was coming on television, and that was right before I would get into cable access. When I was just about had like 1 foot out of high school.
Because I was only 20 at the time. I was like 20, about to turn 21, because this was like in about 88.
Yep, exactly around that time.
So,
that's when I met a lot of the guys at Sunship Communications.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so what was it that got you in? You're mostly known now for your poetry and plays. What got you into poetry?
Actually, I always had a need to like express my voice. I just didn't know how to. And what a lot of people didn't know was that at that time, I was what I call a functional illiterate. Okay. I knew how to, I would verbalize myself, but I didn't know how to write it down. And, I mean, just my education level at the time was very low. And poetry was the first time that I was able to start stringing words together, and then the spring of 1990, I had a rough spring. And first, just to backtrack a little bit, I had met a girl. I had lived in Cleveland for a little while. I had met a girl, and we were talking on the phone, and she was complaining about her boyfriend. Her boyfriend used to play for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And so she used to complain about him, that, oh, he takes advantage of me and stuff like that. And I was trying to figure out, how do I get past her boyfriend? And then one time we were talking on the phone, and I was like, oh, what has a man never done for you before? She's like, a man never wrote a poem for me before. I was like, oh, I write poetry. And I had never written a poem before in my life. And so I sat there and scratched out a poem and mailed it to her. And but after that came the spring of 90, when just a number of events had occurred. I first got into an altercation with an old high school friend. I had transferred to South Park. I got into an altercation with an old high school friend, and he had a group. He was a drug dealer. He had a crew with him, and so they surrounded me. It was like, if you jump off, we will. And we were in, I don't know if you remember the old Continental on Grider in Northland.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
right there in that tight doorway.
Yeah.
And I'm about to fight four men, and I was with a young lady. Say that again.
In that doorway.
In that doorway, and the young lady I was with, the whole altercation was because of her, and so she popped over, opened her purse to get out her knife. And so they were like, oh, we got to take him down. Like, she didn't know who got the knife. And I'm tripping because he and I had never been friends.
Right.
But to see somebody who was really able to kill you at that moment, who you knew, who you had classes with, who you had some laughs with throughout high school, and he's since deceased, but that situation had me reeling, and it was only, I think, our history from high school that let him, and I wasn't going to back down, and I think it was only our history from high school that let him, that told him, I'm going to let him walk out of here. And he demeaned me as much as possible, but said, you're going to walk out with your life. And I had some other friends with me in the club who knew nothing about what was going on. And I was like, I'm kind of responsible for them now. And so I took that, but I felt low. And then a few days later, literally a few days later, my father's brother passed away. And I was just, like I got a phone call from his landlord. I hardly knew my uncle. And so it was weird that, like the phone call came from my parents. I took the phone call. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to get anybody to check in on them, because they said they hadn't heard from them for a few days. I'll go and check on them. And it'll be a good chance for me to sit down and talk to my uncle. Like I've never had a conversation with this man ever in my life.
Right.
And while they gave me his key, I walked into his apartment, and he had died. And I found him, and I had to call my father. I had to call my cousin, whose father it was, and I had to sit there with the body until the police came. The rescue squad came in and said that yes, he is dead, and my aunt, and I had to sit there until all these people came and signed off on it and stuff like that. And so that just sent me into more emotion. Followed by the next month, I saw a young kid getting killed on Jefferson and High Street. And I just tried to get out of my car to try to get him and get him into the car. And he was on a bike, and they were stealing his bike. Instead, the gang turned on me. And all of a sudden, I was like trying to fight my way out of this whole, these guys climbing all over me. And it's a long, very long story. As Denzel would say, make a long story longer. They were climbing all over me, but I eventually did escape, and just all that turned into a poem. Started turning into poetry. I didn't even really know how to write, but it started turning into poetry. My uncle's obituary was actually where my first published poem was on my uncle's obituary. So that's where the poetry really took flight, and it started to involve family. It started to involve the streets, because all of that went into the initial writing. And so I couldn't write whimsical stuff. I was actually jealous of people who could just sit there and write something down, but I was working out of being a functional illiterate at 23. And so that's where it came from.
Okay. And now, I'm going to jump forward up into around the time that I started to know you and saw you up at the Langston Hughes Institute. During this time, I remember I was starting to get on the scene around the mid to late '90s, and I just happened to look around and notice that there was a lot of energy with a lot of up and coming in the Buffalo arts community.
Yeah.
Video, and also in dance, and really in the poetry scene. There were a lot of poets that were kind of on the come up, and
Yeah.
Poetry slams and everything it was starting to take shape in the city of Buffalo. You had some things. I remember some things took place at Langston Hughes, at the African Cultural Center, Ujima Theater. Oh yeah, at Empty Coffee Cup. That opened around
that came in
late, like
99, 2000.
Right around that time. Well, give us some of your reflections on that scene, because I know that led up to you eventually launching Njozi.
Yes. Well, yeah, because during that time, you had Doc Martin and Solar. They were doing the building of hip hop.
Yep.
Which is what they call their
underground directory.
And they were doing the underground directory. You had Kendra Duran. She was doing wordism.
Yes.
And and so they were traveling around. And funny thing was, I actually met Kendra at the Italian festival. I think it was like in about 98 or so. I met her at the Italian festival, and I was there just hanging out. I was doing a play at Ujima, and I was hanging out with Rosalind Ruff before we went to rehearsal. And Kendra came and gave Roz a flyer for Wordism, and I was standing there like, "Where's my flyer?" And Roz was like, "Well, I guess she gave me one because I have an afro. I guess I look like I should be doing poetry." So, and Roz was like, "But I think this is yours." And then I went to Wordism, and I enjoyed it. And so I started going to the Wordisms. I think back then it was Wordism was at the Concrete Cafe on Chippewa. And before that, I had been a part of Andrew Mitchell used to have a group called Naked Voices, and we kind of were born out of the Allentown arts movement, because there was no Black arts movement like in the mid '90s.
Right.
There was no Black poetry movement, and so the Black poets, most of us were going to a place called the Topic Cafe down on Allen Street. And so then when the Topic went away, and some of the people who I was working with, they had moved out of town, like Gino Morrow and Jay Ward, they had moved out of town, and they were in my original group called Black Verses. So I really was kind of just going anywhere that I heard of any poetry going on. Or I would come and spit at the Kwanzaa, or Jomo Okono would, he had access to Africa down on Main Street at the time. And so he would have like some late night after hours poetry sets at access to Africa. And especially like after Kwanzaa events, then we would all go over to Access to Africa, and we would spit. And that's where I actually got to know like a lot of the Habibs better and people like that, Jemani Pitts. And, because we were all spitting down there. And then when Kendra started Wordism, that was where I started meeting many more people. And then I had started Poetic Voices. Kendra joined Poetic Voices along with Stacey Turner. I met Stacey. I was doing a play called Creative Differences, and I had cast Stacey, and was Stacey Cameron now. But so then we started all becoming like fixtures at Wordism, and so the first slam that I ever was a part of was at Topic, and then Kendra did a few slams within Wordism. Then Kendra left, when she graduated from college, she left Buffalo, and I started trying doing Njozi events. My first ones flopped. My first ones, I was leaving the venues with more money than with less money than I came in with. I mean, literally, if I came in with 100, I left with 0. And then we started throwing the Njozi slams at the Empty Coffee Cup. First one was December 3rd, 2000, was the first Njozi slam. And we were shocked when over 100 people came to the slam. And what was so funny is that I joked that we didn't even have door money at the time. We were like collecting people's $5 and that's how we started making change. And like I said, and then over 100 people came, and that was really, we were already playing the magazine, and so that's when
I was about to ask you that. So I wasn't sure if the inception of Njozi was the poetry slams or was it the magazine. So
they were together.
Okay,
they were right together. In fact, the magazine came about. I had an idea for a magazine, but it was one of these things where I always had several things. I'm either going to do this or do that. And so I was actually looking at producing a movie short. And when that fell through, I said, oh, I guess I'm going to try to do a magazine. And so I knew that Eric Rosser, now Dr. Eric Rosser, he was interested in doing a publication also. And so we met, and we said, okay, we'll do a magazine together. And then I was at Sensations, met Jerome Williams, and just randomly, I was sitting next to him. I think I made an announcement and said, like, yeah, we're starting a magazine and we're looking for people to work on it. I would happen to be sitting next to him, and he said, like, oh, I do graphic design. I was like, okay, I've met about 20 graphic designers at this point.
We got a lot more in Buffalo. There's a lot more in Buffalo now.
And I was seeing some interesting work.
Yeah.
And he handed me this CD cover, and this thing was like professional. And I was like, why did this boy come lying to me, trying to claim that he did this CD cover? He know good and well he didn't do the CD cover. But I brought him into a meeting with Eric and I, and another one was Cynthia Brooks. I brought him into a meeting, and he brought more samples of his work.
Yeah,
I was like, oh no, this brother's serious. You know, like he does graphic design.
Yeah,
and I still go to him to this day. Over 20 years later,
oh yeah, he's
I have
good.
some graphic work. I still go to him. But but that's how the magazines started getting launched. And then the name Njozi came because originally the magazine was supposed to be called Dream Magazine. Dream, because the overall company, which people didn't realize, was Dream Variation Enterprises. Okay. Dream Variation after Langston Hughes' poem Dream Variation. Right. And I mentioned Micah Jackson earlier. Back in my Spectra days, she used to do a dance, and she choreographed a dance with Roger Garr doing the poem. And I was always so touched by that, inspired by that dance, that poem, and their delivery of it. I named my company after it. But when you start researching, you realize there's another magazine out there called Dream Magazine. And so then James Cooper suggested, why don't we find a African word that means dream? And that's where, and when we started looking up on the internet, we found Njozi, and that's where Njozi was born.
Okay. So who were some, I know it's a long line of them, but who were some of the people that were involved? And a few of them you've already mentioned. Who were some of the other people involved with Njozi? Because I know it's almost been like an institution at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That I have to look up my notes because I don't want to forget any names and get into trouble. But the original, because the magazine and the and Poetic Voices was kind of interchangeable at the time. So the original lineup for Poetic Voices, the group, was, I said, Stacey Cameron, Jemani Pitts, Olu Tunu, some people know him as Olu Long or Andre Long, Najib Al-Wakil, Kinder Duran, and Rodney Appleby, the bassist. Mm-hmm. So that was the original lineup for Poetic Voices. And then later, Dr. Anthony Neal, yes, and Vanetta T. Rhodes joined. Yes. Ironically, it was a show that was being done in my backyard because we couldn't get any shows. So our carport became, my parents' carport became our stage. Mm-hmm. And
I've been to some of them shows.
Okay, and we performed right in the carport. And amazingly, that's where we got so many more shows from, because we had people come and see us. And we had like about 50 or 60 people there, and they came and checked us out. And so then more venues started to book us. And so I tell people all the time, the Fruit Bowl has been good to me, because when we first told people that this performance was going to be on Rose. They're like, Fruit Belt? Yeah, I ain't going there. You know? We had to like be convincing people, like, no, really, no, you won't get shot. So these are actual conversations.
I can imagine.
No, we have it during the day. You won't get mugged. You're okay. And we were trying to tell people, nobody messing with Mr. Gault. Okay, like we had somebody trying to break in my house, and my father shot them. So, that yeah, and they happen to be one of my childhood friends. So yeah. So the reputation of my father went long. So, like, don't worry, the Gaults are doing something. You don't have to worry about your health or safety. And but yeah, so that was the original crew, but eventually the writers that we had actually started being writers from across the country. I even have a couple of, you see some of the magazine covers for Njozi behind me. We eventually interviewed Professor Griff, because that was a wild thing, was that sometimes I would just start getting calls from their PR people and their publicists.
Right.
And I'm coming home and like, I'm the publicist for Professor Griff, and he would like to talk to you. I'm the director of New Eureka Poets Cafe, and we would like to be interviewed by your company. And so it actually started being exciting because I never knew who was going to be on my answer machine when I came home. So, but James, James Cooper, he joined the Poetic Voices later, but he also became an illustrator for Njozi magazine because everybody was, had like several talents. And I mean, I needed you to be talented in theater. I need you to be talented in publishing. I need you to be talented in poetry, because we were broke. So like, I can't hire all these people.
You need to be a jack of all trades, basically.
Exactly. And me trying to figure it out as I was going along, because I hadn't even finished college at this point. So I'm trying to figure it out. Like, okay, what am I doing? And I would go and read somewhere or go and talk to somebody. One of the people I used to consult with a lot was Ed Watts of Watts Engineering. Ed Watts Senior. We sing in the choir together. And so I would consult with him a lot on how to do business. I would talk to Weta Clapp. She and I were in the choir together also. Right. And so I used to consult with Weta Clapp a lot. And I would talk to a lot of people on how do I do this. Roy Mathis, he was the director of the Royal Serenaders. How do you run a group? Because I don't know. So that's where I would consult with all those people.
Okay.
And of course, Lorna Hill.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's going to be a whole story in itself, but Lorna Hill, because she actually used to perform with Poetic Voices and the Njozi Poets at different times.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is the part where we're gonna bring in Erica, but I know I wanted to talk about you've done some of the shows that you did. I remember one of the shows I remember was a brother's perspective.
Okay, well, Erica came right after I talked about Brother's Perspective.
Yes.
And Brother's Perspective was an incredible show because I know it sounds like these hard luck stories that turn into successes, but these are true. This gives me a chance to talk about Lonnie Harrell. Yes, because A Brother's Perspective, it was a rough time when we were about to do it because Hurricane Katrina had just hit. And in New Orleans, I had just toured through New Orleans and southern Mississippi on some poetry stuff. And then like 2 weeks before Hurricane Katrina hit. And so I wanted to cancel it, but we were not selling tickets. In fact, the Wednesday before the show, we had no tickets sold. Lonnie was one of my ticket sellers. And so I called Lonnie and I was like, man, how many tickets do you have sold? He was like, none. Like, this show is Saturday. He was like, I know. Today is Wednesday. He was like, yeah, we have no tickets sold? Mm-mm. I can't do a show. We have no tickets sold. We were going to be at Ujima. And that same night, Shays was doing a show with all these actors. I can't remember the name of the play. It was all these Black actors, and Miguel Nunez and all these people were in the play. And so all the women were like saying, they're, you know, like trying to sell them a ticket for a brother's perspective. I don't want to be at Shays. You know, I think Leon was in the play, you know, so it was like all these Hollywood actors. And I was like, so I know why I don't have anybody. Yeah. And so then right when Lonnie and I were about to get off the phone, he says, oh, but that's a nice picture on the cover of the Challenger. I was like, my picture's on the front of the Challenger? Yeah, they're advertising the show. And this is a picture of you, James Cooper, and Howard Smith. I was like, I can't cancel the show because, you know, I can't have people get mad at Sister Alnisa. And he's like, nah, you can't. I was like, we stuck with the show, ain't we? Yeah, we are.
Sounds funny.
He was in it. He was one of the featured poets. Do you know that we sold 120 tickets from Wednesday to Saturday?
I was about to say on the day of, but Wednesday to Saturday.
The show was sold out. The show was like, people were sitting on the steps. We had to put sitting on the stage, and it was like, wow. And so then we were like, okay, we got to do this. We got to run this back. And so we did it that December. And in Ujima, we had like about 200 people. And so that just like, you know, that was so exciting. That was just like such an emotional night. But yeah, but a lot of it was, you know, like, so definitely have to say thank you to the Challenger, because Sister Anissa has been there throughout everything for me. From my first play that I did back in '94. Sister Anissa did like feature articles on me on my first play, and like on a couple of poems. Right. And so I had the community the community had my back so much, even when I didn't know what I was doing. The community was there and was making things happen. So, but yeah, that's great that you brought that up.
And I know that there were some other shows, Ancestral Links and Ain't She Brave?
Yeah, Ain't She Brave? Ancestral Links was incredible. We actually sold out Ujima 2 nights, and then we did the show at New Covenant United Church of Christ, and then did another show at Lincoln Memorial, which was just apropos because the music was arranged by Emma J. Horner, who had been the original musical director at Lincoln. And Emma J. Horner, her father was Dr. Charles Albert Tinley, who was the first Black hymnal writer in history. He even wrote the original version of We Shall Overcome. And so that was really special to do Ancestral Links, because we were using her music. And her niece, who she had raised as a daughter, Loretta Anderson, was my father's surrogate mother. And she was my grandmother for all intents and purposes. And so that was a real tribute to, that was as much as a tribute to the Tinley family as it was to the poetry that I was doing.
Okay.
But before that, I actually have to give a shout out to another play that I did called The Voyage from Shame to Glory, because that's when I first met Rosalind Ruff. Was doing. I was directing her, and I trip every time I see Roz in a movie. I go to see The Help. I see Roz. She was in the A Marriage Story. I'm watching Godfather of Harlem, and she doesn't tell me she's in these. All of a sudden, she just pops up on screen. I'm taking pictures of my phone, and I'm texting the pictures. I'm like, you didn't tell me you were in this. But I originally met Roz while she was just a local actress, struggling local actress, trying to do her thing, and then seeing her blow up the way she did. So that's always incredible. But we're going to kick it about Ain't She Brave. I got to bring Erica in because Erica has a long story about Ain't She Brave. Dr. Bell? And she's bringing her chair through.
Okay.
We'll bring you in later. My daughter is like...
Absolutely.
We'll bring you in later.
Hi, Doug. How's it
Erica,
going?
how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Good to see you. Glad to be here.
Well, hope Arizona's
It seems intentional.
That's why I had to raise it. I'm like, okay, you're not going to come off and say like there's some misogyny going on. You below me.
So Erica, I know you yourself have certainly played a significant role in the work of Ntare Ali Gault. Talk to us about, because I know you've done a number of performances with Ntare. So talk to us about your role.
I think so. Ntare accomplished a number of incredible things before we met, and that was really how we met. So I don't know. I don't think so much of like myself playing a kind of key role. We just happen to accentuate each other. In terms of, no, I don't. I'm serious.
No, okay,
I'm serious.
okay. Not that I'm trying to cut in on.
By the way, how did the two? I should have asked this question first. How did the two of you meet?
And that's okay. So I think that's an important story. So it doesn't seem like any kind of false humility on my part. We met at my job. My job was having a poetry night, and one of my colleagues also he saw you all
Anthony
perform.
Hughes. Yeah.
Where was it? At the
screening room.
At the screening room.
Okay.
He saw Njozi Poets perform at the screening room, and when Anthony got ready to have a similar event, he asked them to come, and he heard that I did poetry. So he also asked me to perform, and it was an evening event. So that was how we met, but it was a couple years later, maybe like a year and a half, 2 years. It was 2 years later where I got an email from, what is his name? Crosby, Bill Crosby.
Oh, okay.
Bill Crosby would send out this kind of newsletter of events happening around the city and other kind of Afrocentric kind of news. And one of them was about this poetry slam. And I was thinking about branching out in terms of spoken word and getting back. I had done slam at like a lot of places in undergraduate when I was in New York City, and I was really looking forward to getting back into that. And so I said, this is a really good entry point. And I think I remember this person from when they came to Hilbert College to perform. And so I called him up. and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just to piggyback that story, we had some amazing poets in this. It was the first Buffalo Niagara International Poetry Slam.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some amazing poets in it. One of them was Carlos Andres Gomez. He was a New Rican poet. He was in Spike Lee's Inside Man. He was competing. We had Versus Jamal May from Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
We had like these amazing poets from Toronto performing, and Burlington and Rochester. And in the first round, she slayed all of them. She was in first place, and everybody's like, "Who is she, and where does she come from?" And I was like, "That's the girl who was at Hilbert." Oh, okay. And then the second round, she didn't have the same type of performance, and so I sent her an email after that. I was like, and I told her, I said, "It seemed like you only came prepared for one round. I would like for you to work with me this summer with the Njozi Poets and compete in Toronto." And then I said, "And you work with me, I promise you'll be like in the top 5 at the Toronto International Poetry Slam, where there was a bigger collection of like some of the baddest poets you ever want to see."
And I was really trying to write a play of poetry. So the slamming for me was always this kind of ancillary goal. But that's what I mean when I say he was already pretty successful. It wasn't like I walked in and there were like there were newspapers up to the window. He had a pretty great setup before I got there.
But
So,
I mean, I got the wall in the back, so I can only imagine what it looked like.
yeah.
But the play that she was working on was Ain't She Brave?
Yeah, that play was Ain't She Brave.
So,
and that was our first date.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
She was working on Ain't She Brave before she actually met me.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I had this poem where I was like, it feels like it starts out sway, rock, sway, where these two people have been tossed into this whole new world called the Middle Passage. But they start out in love. And this, how do you tell a story of resistance in the midst of that kind of trauma? Was really the entry point for me for that work. How do you tell a love story in the Middle Passage? And I was writing it and I shared it with him.
That was our first date.
Yeah.
She shared a poem with me,
mm-hmm.
and then I wrote in addition to that poem.
Mm-hmm.
And then she wrote in addition to the poem that I was writing.
Yeah, and that was the start of Ain't She Brave.
And that was the start of Ain't She Brave, yeah. And that play went on to, the original production was directed by Lorna.
Yeah.
At Buffalo East.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was produced in New York and produced in Phoenix, Arizona, and then in Buffalo again, where I directed the production in Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
The second time.
And what have been the responses as you've gone, taking your performances beyond Buffalo?
Yeah, so
you want to answer?
For Ain't She Brave?
Yeah.
I think so. It was really meaningful, the kind of transformative experience that people had around that work of different genders, different regions, races that I had not fully expected, because in large part I was telling my story or stories that I wanted to honor, and the same thing with Ntare. So in some ways that was overwhelming, but to see it on this stage in places where we had not gone,
mm-hmm.
That was the biggest thing, because it meant people, especially for the actresses, people were reading their stories into it in some ways that I had never imagined. So yeah, that was beautiful for me to see.
And for me, while I was sitting in New York and watching the production and hearing audience reactions, they didn't know who I was, and they're reacting to the play, and I'm seeing people tearing up. We had a song in there, and heard people singing the song, like they started, engaging with the actresses singing, and I knew that song was written around our kitchen table.
Yeah.
So you knew that this was touching people, because here we were down in New York and people were clapping their hands, stomping their feet, singing the song. I'm like, I know that song was written around our kitchen table.
Yeah.
They didn't know this song before they heard it here. And that told me that it was so much bigger than the two of us. People would come and tell us their story, and how a story that we told within the play meant, not meant so much to them, but it was something that they experienced. One of the biggest compliments was I wrote a story that my mother had always told me about when she was a day's worker. And Erica actually did the monologue. After the play, my mother was telling me, like, oh, I had that same story, and she was explaining to me. I'm like, yeah, I know you had that story because that was your story. She's like, no, but and this woman, she used to always make me get on my knees and scrub the floor. I'm like, I know, because it's your story. And my mother, and then it took my mother a minute to realize that was her story on the stage. Erica told her own 9/11 story from the stage. And so it gave us the opportunity to tell these very unique stories that's rarely ever told about Black women, but here they are on the stage. And so it started connecting, with the one young lady who was at the play in Buffalo, and she's at the talk back, she broke down, started crying, and she was telling the story, and it inspired her. She went on and became an actress herself, and took theater graduated with her BFA from Morgan State. So it was things like that was just incredible.
And I know speaking of, we talked earlier about a brother's perspective, but it just occurred to me that you had a show called A Sister's Perspective, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. We did that twice. And I gotta give Dwayne Morgan a shout out, because I was really just copying off of his shows in Toronto. He has a show called When Brothers Speak and When Sisters Speak in Toronto. Yes. And so if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, I was imitating him a lot. Because I really didn't know what I was doing. So I would see what somebody else is doing around the country, and well, in that case, Toronto, and say, how can I do that in Buffalo? And in Baltimore and Philadelphia, they were doing a show called The Kings of Poetry. Okay. And so that became, for me, a brother's perspective, and it became a sister's perspective, which the first one was actually called Ladies First, which was, ode to Queen Latifah. I love that joint. So I did Ladies First, and then a brother's perspective and a sister's perspective. And we just had some hot talent in that also. Some of the people, I was just amazed by what they accomplished, and I'm still amazed by where I see them. Right. And to know that they, not started on that stage, but seeing them they had been on my stage was always incredible to me.
Okay, so I think I've covered everything. Is there anything that I'm missing? Because I know you've done so many performances over the years.
Well, if I talk about everything that we're missing, we'll be here for another 2 hours. So, okay. But one thing that I missed, which is major, I missed saying thank you, Doug, for not just doing this interview with us, but you're grabbing a part of Buffalo that many people knew about, but and we talk about it like, oh, do you remember the Center of Positive Thought? Do you remember this? And but you having people who actually were the starters of it coming and talking about it, and that's a history that that is being captured and won't go away. It's going to live on in YouTube history. And people are going to be coming on and researching the things that you're bringing forth. And so that is a major thank you to you for what you're doing here.
Absolutely. Is Hazel still there?
Yes.
Hazel's around.
Waiting for her turn.
I know she's been itching to get on the camera.
Yeah, she's been a good girl.
Hello, Hazel.
Hi.
Yeah.
You made it. You made the cut.
Made the cut.
Which she's becoming a dramatic artist in her own right.
I know she's going to be in the arts, involved in the arts in some capacity.
We actually established her own arts gallery in her playroom.
So we have a visual artist.
We have a visual artist. And many of the pictures that you see posted on Facebook of the two of us, she took.
Yep.
So she's starting to express herself.
Yeah.
And I have to give Hazel a shout out because you recently made a post. I posted the documentary 67 Buffalo Uprising. Yeah. And she spotted your mother in one of the films.
Oh,
that film, I've used that film in a number of things that I had no idea that was your mother. And when I saw the post, I almost fell out of my chair. I'm like, you got to be kidding. How did I miss that?
Yeah, I think that Dr. Lloyd's mother spotted it originally. She spotted it because she had sent me an email. She's like, isn't that your mother in there? I was like, I don't know, I haven't seen it. And my mother, during the riots of '67, my mother was 9 months pregnant with me. So I doubt she was out protesting anything. And she was like, no, before you were born. I was like, I don't know what my mother was doing before I was born. And then when I was watching it one day, and Hazel was sitting there watching it with me, and she's like, that's my grandma. I was like, that is my mother. So yeah.
Before you did.
And what's incredible, Hazel was born a year after my mother passed away.
Yeah.
So she's seen pictures of my mother, but that's just incredible. And speaking of my mother, I do have I've written a play about my mother's family and my mother's early life, which I'm looking to get produced. It's called Wildflower. Okay. And
yes, I remember because that's one of your favorite songs. Because I remember I was on WBLK and I would play it during the Quiet Storm and you would shout me out for it.
Man, okay. I said I was going to try not to blubber on this, but that was a Mother's Day, and I had done the show at Ojima, and so I had not seen my mother all Mother's Day. And you asked, I was listening to your show like about 11 o'clock at night. And my mother was a little bit upset. She was a little bit perturbed that I was not around for Mother's Day at all. And I lived upstairs from her at the time. So when you said, if you have any dedications, call them in. And usually whenever you said that, the phone would be busy. Mm-hmm. I called that time and got through to you on the first try. Wow. And so I told this long story about how I hadn't seen her and things like that. Yeah. And so then you said, okay, I'm going to put that song on.
I got to find it.
I went down and woke her up. And I went downstairs, woke her up and said, I want you to hear something. Man, you went and repeated everything that I had said about how I wish that I could have been there with her for Mother's Day and everything like that. And then you put on Wildflower.
Wow.
And she and I just sat on that couch and cried and I think that was 98, Mother's Day of 98. Wow. And she and I just held her and we just cried. And so when I started writing a play about her life, that song, that title just jumped out at me, and that memory jumped out at me.
It might have been I think that's a few years ahead, because I got on BLK in 2000.
Oh, okay. Then it was 2000.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to find. I got my air checks. I'm gonna have to find that now.
Okay. Then it would have been 2000. Then.
Okay.
I think I joined Ujima in. I joined Ujima in 98. So yeah, it would have been 2000.
Okay.
Because we always used to play at Pfeiffer Theater, the old Pfeiffer Theater, which is down the town ballroom.
Right.
And so we had to take everything back to Ujima after the show. It was only three of us doing that. It was myself, Roosevelt Tidwell, and Bob Ball. And we had to take down the entire set, pack it up into a truck, all the costumes and everything, and load them all back into Ujima. And so by the time I got home, it was like 11 o'clock at night. But my mother's, that was her best Mother's Day, because it showed that I had not forgotten about her.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, if we have nothing else, I certainly would like to thank you all for being on, the three of you, for being on the Buffalo History Channel.
My pleasure.
One other thing.
Yes.
Enjoyed the slams and everything like that. Because eventually the Buffalo Niagara International Slams went to the Trough, and they're still two of the largest slams ever in Buffalo's history. And we had poets literally come from all across the country. And a lot of that happened because I remember I told her I would like to put an event up at the Trough, and she put up the original down payment so that we could get the Trough. And so some of the biggest successes was, and I want to give her her flowers, her shout out, her props, not in secret, but for everybody to hear, because ain't she brave traveling like that, the slams becoming what they were, that was having Erica by my side and making those things happen. So I want to definitely give her all the credit that she deserves for making those things happen.
Erica, we appreciate you.
Okay, now I'm done.
All right. Well, thank you all for being on the Buffalo History Channel.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you so much.
One of these days we'll get back in. One of these days we'll get back in the Buffalo at the same time. We got to hook up.
I know, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. The Juneteenth reunion, we're planning it for next year.
Really?
A Juneteenth reunion party, and it's going. We're also planning an all high reunion for Juneteenth reunion. So look out for that. And
I'm definitely gonna. Looks like I'm gonna have to come back, make some plans for that.
We plan on making it huge. So, okay, man.
All right, man. Take care.
Peace.
Take care.
All right.
Big Mama had some beautiful hands. They were old, swollen, arthritic, and weathered hands. Her heart and veins seemed like branches of rivers flowing through her aching, sore, and fragile hands. They were scarred from cotton picking, corn shucking, and chicken plucking. Yes, Big Mama had some beautiful hands. Big Mama's hands never struck me, but with a gentle word of comfort, her hands would caress me. They never scolded me, but only on a few occasions, they were able to hold me. Now, our mamas told us that we couldn't call their mama, so the grandkids named Essie Murders Johnson Patrick Big Mama. Now, she was the smallest of physical stature, but rose above us all in spiritual understanding. With pain patient eyes and a grateful heart, she could ease the most tense moments with the slightest moan of a tune that only she knew. But I could sit back and listen and wait for the stories to follow. The stories were like water, and I was a seed, and I could feel myself grow. The lines were written all over her face and hands. Yes, those homemade iced tea making, chicken frying, breakfast for a king cooking hands. Oh man, Big Mama had some beautiful hands. Praying hands. Bible thumping, Jesus praising, 12 children nursing, never heard her cursing, white glove wearing hands. Dead son holding. Dying husband dragging. Deceased mother dressing. But always professing and confessing hands. I grew up admiring those hands. I loved to touch them and feel the power of her blood pumping life into me. I could never tell if the transfer was literally or metaphorically, but I felt the magic. I received the gift to lift and elevate my fate to be truly a part of the ancestors. For 88 years, Big Mama labored in this vineyard on this plantation with no explanation for the affliction that inflicted her for the final 9 years. Her eyes spoke with a clarity and sincerity that's as powerful today as it was yesterday. For 88 years, she toiled in the Mississippi heat, muddied by the red soil, colored with American dreams of owning her own home, of not being left alone, of wanting her family by her side. She wanted to find her piece of peace in a society that would judge her as an old black woman widow with young mouths to feed. For 88 years, she was a solid rock to a family that scattered through the lakes and oceans to escape a land that oppressed us and a land that hated us. On November 17, 1993, the angel was granted her angelic wings and flung them against the wind, finding her freedom, knowing only those whose weary souls have found rest. Those who confess with the mouth and heart receive favor by the Heavenly Father, proclaiming to good and faithful servants, well done. Your rest is won. But I still miss Big Mama's hands. Because Big Mama had some beautiful hands.